I'm the Chief of Strategy and Business Development at Konnect, which is the innovation hub of Volkswagen Group in Tel Aviv. And today we will talk about sustainable mobility and transportation. So up until a few years ago, this combination of sustainability and the words automotive mobility could not be in the same sentence. You agree with me, right? That is really, we've come to a time when no OEM, no mobility player can basically exist without investing, developing sustainable technologies. And that's what we're all here about. On this panel, we have three sharks, three investors, and I'm representing, as I said, the Volkswagen Group. So the transportation industry, you must maybe know the numbers, is contributing over 16% to emissions. And this is an astonishing number. So it's really clear that the industry has to go through decarbonization. However, it's very challenging. Besides the fact that this is a very well-established industry, long, bureaucratic, I believe that we should keep on also remembering that mobility is a necessity. So while investing in decarbonization technologies, electrification, we also need to keep the right of people to move in an affordable way. And that is a basic right. We've seen it in COVID, we've seen it in Corona, so we always have to keep in mind, and this is what makes this transition so challenging, how do we push for this change while keeping the right of people to move as it's a basic right? The Volkswagen Group is a huge one. You must probably know we produce and sell 10 million cars per year. So we're a major contributor in that sense to the gas emissions, but not only in land, also our factories, of course, our processes. And the Volkswagen Group has recognized pretty early on, I would say, some would say it has to do with the Dieselgate, but these are kind of dynamics in global economy that led the group also to decide to focus very much on electrification. So electrification is the main tool today of our group to change. Our strategic plan, Go to Zero, basically says that Volkswagen Group will be CO2 neutral by 2050. This will be throughout electric models in all our brands by investing billions of euros in electrifying our cars. But not only that, throughout all the life cycle of our products and our factories, of course, we are about to launch 6 battery factories, 2 or 3 were already launched. We're also developing new mobility services, whether it's through robotaxi projects, ride-hailing projects in Germany, and so on. And one of the most interesting initiatives that was published is a decarbonization fund in the amount of 300 million euros, which will hopefully start to work next year and invest in decarbonization topics. So Konnect, just to connect to what we're doing here, looking at all these really challenging goals of our group, our hub here in Tel Aviv basically works with Israeli startups. As we know and seen in this incredible conference, what we do is we identify the needs of our brands, the pain points, the use cases which need a solution here in this market. We find the startup, we validate its technology throughout different tests that we're doing here in the market, and we match it then to our brands. And in recent years, we've collaborated with many of the startups that are here presenting, but we're looking for more. I mean, if you are a startup in this realm, please contact us. So I want to introduce in more length our participants. We have Avi Feldman, who's a managing partner, and he has founded Mobilion Ventures, which is the only early stage venture fund that invests in smart mobility, focused on aftermarket. And later on, you'll explain the connection between aftermarket and green technologies. We have Nadav, who's the founder and CEO of Nomea. He's based in London, so thank you for joining us. And he basically invests in climate tech early and late stage startups in the UK, Europe, and Israel. And last but not least, we have Dr. Tal Cohen, who's a founding partner of Drive Tel Aviv. I guess you all know, but for the ones who don't know, Drive is an innovation center that basically includes many activities supporting startups by connecting them to global automotive players. And Tal has founded many companies as well as invested in them. And I want to start with you, Tal. I've mentioned the Volkswagen Group goals, and you work with many OEMs, Honda, Volvo, but not just OEMs. You work with many mobility players, whether it's Hertz and others. You must be very close to their strategic plans. What really unites all the kind of, future plans for decarbonization with all the OEMs? And what are the main challenges to achieve those goals?
Thanks, Hemdat. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here with the good friends here. So thanks very much for inviting us. So I think that if we look at the challenges, strategy of the OEM, but also in general, mobility players, we have to look at it from the perspective of time. And I would say just about 10, 15 years ago, the strategy in mobility, it was not that clear how strong sustainable mobility electrification will play. The picture then was, hey, you have the connectivity we have to take care of, we have the autonomous to take care of, we have shared mobility, and then we have electrification too. It was some sorts of like a combination of things. And I think as we progressed in time, we saw that the autonomous stuff, we build capabilities, but it's not there so quickly. Connectivity actually happens. It's an infrastructure concept that yields some services. Shared is still growing, but economically doesn't show viability yet, while electrification became the thing. Okay, so we evolved into focusing on sustainability, electrification, and that's, if you will, translate into the strategy. So initially, I would say 10 years ago, electrification with Volkswagen or GM or Volvo or Honda or Toyota was somehow exotic. So you have one or two models that you come up with, okay? You let it roll, and then, but the majority of your fleet, the models is going to be based on ICE, okay? So that's reality. What happened is that it becomes mainstream. So that's what happened in lately. So the declarations are every OEM, basically, almost, saying by year this and this, boom, everybody's going to be EVs, okay? But I think this is only the middle of the strategy process. So remember, we move from exotic to mainstream. I think that we're going to encounter the next phase. And the next phase is going to be game-changing. So what OEMs are doing, including Volkswagen or our partners and others, is using the current infrastructure in general to deploy new technologies and new operations, like new battery, factories, gigafactories, understanding energy infrastructure issues, and so on and so forth. But I think the completion of this revolution is going to be by paradigm shift of who actually these entities are. So I think that the challenges are real, and right now the risks are very high. So when you see Volkswagen or others saying, "Hey, we're going to change, we're going to make EVs is the main issue," it means that we know we're going to make EVs, but we don't know how the ecosystem is going to be around that. Okay, so it's, for example, Volvo. Very quickly, Volvo Trucks and Buses, one of our partners as well, is looking at in Southern California an exercise by which they are designing path for trucks based on energy supply and limiting their path and warehouse capability based on the availability of the energy and so on and so forth. So a coherent strategy, that's the challenge for the OEMs, and we'll see that coming.
I just read this morning a really interesting strategy where GM is collaborating with Hertz, one of your partners, and they will provide a fleet of 2,000 EVs to hertz. That's fascinating because people who have anxiety about electric vehicles can basically test drive with rentals and kind of not be super committed to it. And that's, I think, is a good example of what you just explained to us. It's a really interesting and good example.
Yeah.
Good. So, Avi, according to the PLANETech report, 1 out of 7 new Israeli startups focus on climate tech solution. I think it's very surprising. I mean, I came here and I was astonished about the size of the startups. And why am I surprised? I think, to be honest, that Israel is not the greenest country in the world. I think the awareness of people, if you're just looking at the way people separate garbage, which is not really happening, is pretty low. Plus the fact that we're super congested and there's so many cars on the roads. How do you explain that? This kind of, there's almost 700 startups, I think. How do you explain that phenomenon?
I think that, I'm not a sociologist, so it's a guess on my side, but I think that there is something in our culture of doing good. There was a term that we've used a few years ago of tikkun olam and all that will look to contribute and not only innovate pure innovation as it is. So kind of double bottom line in terms of both the innovation and doing good. I can tell you that, for example, for me, I started Capital Nature more than 10 years ago, and we've created a line of startups within the climate world. Some of them are in the transportation, doing very well, and moving into a fund that is totally focused on mobility. I think that bringing for example, for myself, bringing my values of having to be sustainable as part of the investment thesis of the fund. Today, our current fund is more than half into sustainable mobility solutions. I'll give some examples so you'll see that. And in our next fund that we are going to initiate, it's going to be even higher. So Tal was talking earlier about the OEM and the OEM strategy, which goes to really the battery and the propulsion system. Yeah. I think that, and if you'd like, we can go deeper into that. The service side is not less of interest to focus on, and through that to take new technologies into market.
So maybe just explain, you were focusing on aftermarket. Maybe just explain how is that connected to. So
if we are looking at the baseline of emissions back in 1990, the only sector that the emission just got higher is transportation. All other sectors have reduced to some extent. The only sector that the emissions are still growing is the transportation. So the problem is only getting bigger and bigger. Now, moving to electrification is good, but it's a long process. It would take a lot of years until it will kick in. So trying to bring technologies through the aftermarket, meaning through selling directly to whoever is moving the cars. It could be fleets, it could be public transportation, and it could be the end consumer. So those technologies that you can integrate and embed upon an existing vehicle could do the shift, the transition tomorrow morning.
Can you give some examples?
Yeah, so thank you. So one example would be Algolion. It's a company that in our portfolio that does monitoring of the health state of the battery. And this is one of the the burning issue and really a burning issue when you're talking about lithium-ion batteries that tend to be very sensitive. So if you're able to monitor them either on the battery management side or on the cloud, but giving all the users, it could be the private user, it could be the fleet operator, it could be even the diagnostic within workshops. Okay, you bring in a new vehicle. How do you know that the battery of this vehicle is safe and you can connect it to the electricity within the workshop? So through these kind of digital services that you're able to monitor and to give additional value. I'll give you just a small another sample. We have a company called Clickins. They do automated damage detection of the body part. Now,
how is that connected to our topic?
So, salvage. There are many cars that are getting off the roads, but many parts of those cars are still good to go. You can retrieve them and fix other cars. That's circular economy at its best. And this is exactly based on data, based on real services that you can sell tomorrow morning. They are already selling. Those are examples that you can shift the needle tomorrow morning, and you don't need to wait until the electrification hype would kick in, and it would take a decent few years until it will happen.
Thanks, Nadav. So you're an investor in PLANETech Technologies. Your role is super important, of course. All this innovation and technologies cannot happen without major investments. I want to focus on mobility and transportation. Okay, so specifically that. What do you think are the most promising solution in this subsector? What are you looking to invest in?
Okay, so first of all, it's a great question. I just say before, I'm really happy to be here. I've never been...
It's a way to stall time.
I've never been in a panel where both the audience and the panelists wear headsets. So that's a new one. So congratulations to PLANETech.
Really innovative.
One number that is good to keep in mind as we're talking about sustainable mobility is that if we're talking about in total number of unicorns in climate tech, it's probably just about over 80. It depends how you count them. Over half of them are in sustainable mobility. So the opportunity is huge. Okay, so to go back to the question, I'll zoom in on two main topics. The first is batteries, just to kick off on a few things that the other panelists have said that I completely agree. And the second is battery recycling. Because if we talk about batteries, we have to zoom in on battery recycling. What happens with those batteries after 8 years? That's usually the warranty that you'd get from an OEM for those lithium-ion batteries. So let's zoom in on batteries. One, we see a lot of innovation in the battery space. Most of them focus on the chemistry side. They've been able to take down the cost of batteries by almost 87% in the past 10 years. The cathode is the most expensive part of the battery. So I would, as a climate tech investor, would like to see more new technologies, new type of chemistries, and new type of innovations tackling this. The second thing, going back to battery recycling, is that, and it goes back to what Tal said, electrification is not a trend. Electrification is a revolution. And we're really just at the beginning. If there's now 2 billion cars on the road and about 100 million cars made annually, and we're transitioning from internal combustion engine to EVs, we have to focus on what are we going to do with those batteries at the end of life. There's two key technologies of how you recycle them and you extract those expensive, because there's quite of expensive minerals. Some of you probably already know this, but both on the anode and the cathode side, right? Depends on the chemistry. So just to finish off, but one, we have to scale technologies that are both cost competitive and with a low carbon footprint to extract those valuable materials and put them back to the supply chain. It goes back to circularity and many other things. So that's two main areas that we would like to see more innovation in terms of sustainable mobility.
I have a follow-up question for you.
Please.
Aren't you afraid of a hype? Meaning, everybody wants to say, I have a climate tech and solution. Everybody's, it's become this trend. Of course, it's super important but how do you identify it's a good solution? What's your way of filtering, the noise, the hype?
I think that probably in some areas of climate, there might be a hype. A lot of capital is coming in a very short amount of time. Valuations are going up in some sectors. But at the same time, what are we trying to achieve here? We're trying to both save the planet and reduce emissions. We understand that we cannot continue business as usual. And two, invest in companies that we think are going to be highly successful and highly profitable in the future. So one, that's a good business to be at. That's the foundation of how I see things. Two, in batteries, I think that there's a lot of focus on solid state. That's one. And there's a lot of focus on silicon anodes that is going to replace graphite. It's about energy density. I don't want to get too much into the details for the time being. But those are two areas that we definitely see many, many startups. In other areas, either went back to the cathode, the most expensive part of the batteries, and other things related to sustainable mobility that we haven't discussed. I don't see a hype. And I think that we're just in the beginning.
Tal, you want to say something?
First of all, I'm pumped up for the enthusiasm that Nadav is showing.
Exactly.
Here. But honestly, I really think that, particularly in climate tech, in this concept, technology have a major role in making an impact, because you need the regulator, you need the consumer, you need many things. Okay, and the way we see the world now, everybody needs to collaborate. Politics, nations, globally. So with the relatively desperate situation in current geopolitical situation, I really think that our best hope is the combination of amazing entrepreneurs collaborating with people that understand how to give them attention to be successful. So this is why I'm enthusiastic from what Nadav is saying as well. What is it?
So maybe you can tell what Drive is doing in terms of building an ecosystem around that topic.
Yeah, sure. So what basically Drive is a microcosmos of where the mobility goes, okay? So if you look at our startups right now, about 50% or just a little bit more are about some sorts of sustainable mobility, where it be, batteries, aftermarket, fleets, even alternative energy, okay? To that level. The reason being is because our agenda is not to be complete. We don't have like a matrix with check mark. We just say, we're going to cover this, okay? We are collecting list of thousands of needs that all our partners and other may have, and they kind of extend that. And then we ask ourselves, what are the top entrepreneurs are looking for? And what are they doing? So we try to kind of create the infrastructure. I'll give a few examples. About 4 years ago, just to the discussion we had with Nadav, came to me a young entrepreneur. His name is Moshiel from Adionics. Okay?
Sure.
And he was just with two people. And then he said to me, Tal, we have a great idea about batteries. Everybody's coming up with new chemistries. We have a different way to look at the structure. Okay. Now, look, I showed Moshiel technology to some OEMs that I don't want to disclose. And they said, just go to LG, go to Samsung. We don't care about that. Okay. But we had a good guess that in a few years, the mobility world will really be interested in what he's doing, okay? Because you cannot ignore a source of energy. And 4 years ago, the OEMs thought that the battery manufacturer is going to solve the problems about capabilities, performance. So I just have to give specification for the battery manufacturers, and boom, there you go. I'm going to have a best model of a car. But lo and behold, not exactly. Okay, so now the OEMs feel they have to take their own destiny, in their own hands and backyard, and you see the OEM become actually battery manufacturers, whether it be JV or direct. Okay, I don't have to tell you that. And suddenly, Moshiel, that 4 years ago was what? To the OEM is like, gang, everybody's running after Adionics and Moshiel right now. So I can tell you example now that we talk about Moshiel in the retrospective, and give an example now that people in mobility not necessarily understand about the startup, that why is this related to me as mobility, but mark my words, in 5 or 10 years, they would say, wait a minute, okay? And that startup is Fusion Startup. So right now, we had the Fusion startups coming up for the last year and a half that we're working on very tightly, and we're setting up for a huge round with amazing mobility players' participation that is tackling the most fundamental climate problem that can be solved. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it's EV, batteries, energy has to come from somewhere.
Right.
And the energy comes from, downstream from carbon source. That's a problem, okay? So fundamentally, solar, wind are not going to be the answer. They're going to be carrying the load, okay? So it's going to be either nuclear or some other phenomenal technology, which is fusion. So we have the first startup in Israel that's going to come out of the dark mode soon. Everybody's going to hear about that. And they are actually having amazing potential. And people that have far-sighted, hopefully, it's going to be a long shot, but they're going to supply an amazing answer to the market. So that's how we try to tackle it in Drive.
You got us curious. But we also met Adionics at the same time. So one technology which we didn't mention is carbon capturing. That's also something super interesting, also for our group. Of course, it's a technology that will be challenging to scale, but it's, I think, as we mentioned, the topics here on stage, this is also something we should look at. And speaking of all these amazing technologies in Israel, I think, Avi, back to the question about why Israel, because Israelis have chutzpah. And they say, I can solve the world's problems, right? And I think that is why we see people here with guts, with a lot of, bravery to come up and say, that's a global problem. Although I'm in a very small market, I will solve it. And this is why I hope this ecosystem will grow and grow. And I want to ask you, Avi, what do you think with all this potential still are the challenges for Israeli startups in globalizing their technology and so on?
So exactly what you started with. We have a lot of chutzpah in a very small market. So what do you do with it? Here in the Israeli market, you can play with it, you can create it, but the market is not here. So much as Tal was saying earlier, when we started Mobilion, we thought exactly about that. What would be the value that we can bring to startups? Bringing just the money is great, but it's not enough. And if you want, as a startup, to reach the global market, you need access and you need the ability to scale in terms of technological and business opportunities. Otherwise, you're playing with yourself in a niche market. And we went outside to the corporate world. Our fund is almost all of our LPs are corporates within either the manufacturing side, tier ones, OEMs, or the user side, fleet manager, public transportation operators, and so on. And the idea, the mindset behind it was that not only doing good investment, but bringing them exactly to our partners, connecting them, and seeing that each of those startups can reach the market through a channel that we are able to help them. And this is exactly as I see it, that's the major challenge for startups for their, the early mid stages, is reaching the market, validating that their technology is needed in the market. It's not only stories or good concepts, it's a real business. And the way to do it is by those, providing those connections. By the way, we've just started another initiative, which would be in parallel to Mobilion. So it's not part of the VC itself, but it sits. One of our major partner, our co-founding partner, is a group called Nexus Automotive International. They are the leading automotive aftermarket distributor worldwide, over $35 billion in sales in almost every country. And with them, we are establishing today a kind of a platform, which would be a digital platform that will connect talking about Konnect, will connect startups on a global level with the industry. So the basic idea is exactly to create this capability, okay, and access of any startup globally wise with our help and also capability of opening the door, but with any industry provider of technology or services.
Nadav, last question to you, and then a final round. We are all corporates here, but representing also Avi in a way, right? How do you see this change in transportation and mobility? You see so many technologies. You see this attempt of startups to scale and to work with corporates. It's kind of like giants. Everybody wants to do good, right? But it's a slow and how do you see the future for this specific sector for mobility, sustainable mobility transportation?
Okay, again, fantastic question.
Again.
Fantastic question. I'll tell you two things. The first, and not enough people are talking about it. Everybody are talking, for example, we spoke about batteries, so they speak about it's capital intensive and the cycles and etc. But maybe the biggest challenge that if you want to found a successful battery startup is that you have to engage with so many industry players, both in the upstream and the downstream. Think about it. So you have to speak with the precursors and the cathode producers and the battery manufacturers. Sometimes they ask you to go further in the upstream, and you have to show that you can actually source certain materials that you need. Again, going back to the cathode and the anode. So that's just one example of why it's challenging sometimes to found certain startups. At the same time, I think that the further we're going to continue in the cycle, the easier it's going to get. We see regulation improving dramatically. We haven't really spoken about it today, or maybe at the conference, but we've all seen in the news the $370 billion Inflation Reduction Act announced in the States. That's major news for mobility, specifically. The last thing that I would like to say, and then maybe we can go for the final round, is that we're talking about sustainable mobility, and we're zooming in on road transportation. At the same time, aviation, shipping, trucking deserve to get more attention and capital. We're talking about net zero, and this is part of a broader PLANETech conference. This is vital, really vital. Long-haul transportation is perhaps one of the areas in the economy that are more difficult to decarbonize, and there's definitely some great opportunities there as well for the entrepreneurs in the crowd.
I'm looking forward to it. And one last question on a personal level. How do you contribute to sustainability in your day-to-day life? And I can start. I walk every morning to work, although I represent an automotive company, and it's a 20-minute walk with a stroller. I'm very proud of myself. So I really, really try to walk as much as I can. I know it's not, a huge game changer, but a bit. So what do you do? And I want you also to pledge on another step you will take to contribute to environment. Nadav, Tal, who wants to start? And pledging is very serious. You have to fulfill it. We'll come back in 1 year.
I'm happy to start. I will start by saying I will pledge whatever Tal pledges. That's first of all. Okay, so please be careful with what you're pledging, and I'm going to stand up to it. That's number one. Think I live in London. We're a UK-based PLANETech fund. I don't own a car. My wife and we don't own a car. I think the idea of car ownership will change in the future. So I walk as much as I can. I ride the bicycle. Again, I traveled here, so I emit greenhouse gases. But I think consciousness, it's starting to, we're making big steps towards it.
And sorry for the Queen.
So first, Nadav made it much more fun for me. Thanks very much, Nadav. I have to be very, creative now with that. But First, I think that's actually the question is very good because we always, we talk on a high level, but what are we really doing? So walking is good. I cannot say, I have to admit, I cannot say I walk to work, okay? But I do walk, okay? But while I walk, that's the time by which I think how to help my startups
That's a good one.
to be impactful.
I don't know
and help them solve that.
I don't know
okay?
if I accept that.
I know that's tricky, but honestly, also you visit Drive, yeah. So everybody's welcome to visit Drive, and we have a pledge in our realm to become more climate conscious in Drive.
Nice.
So we changed the cups to glass cups, and we make sure that all what we do on a day-by-day basis is working on that, and I'm very happy that we are doing that. Okay. In parallel, I ask everybody, including my friend here, Omer, which represent the Mara Group, to sell more electric cars. So they brought Polestars, and I invite everybody to buy because probably I'm going to do the same here. So.
Avi.
So I will go for public transportation. I think that all of us need to cut down on our private car uses. So I'll take at least a 40% public transportation in my day-to-day. And on top of that, with regard to our activity as a fund, since we are now just about to start a new fund, the sustainable mobility would be the leading theme within that fund. So
congratulations. So thank you so much. I had a great time. I hope you too.
Thank you very much, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.